right, so we are going to be continuing with chapters 28 through 33. So that's what we'll be diving into here in a moment. But before we begin, I wanted to ask, does anyone have any questions from the previous weeks? Anything you want me to address that we've talked about so far? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the similarities to what's going on in the world right now and everything like that. Yeah. I do want to issue a word of caution, because I said this last week and we had a bit of fun with it. Israel's not Israel is not Israel is not Israel. And I've got 4 different Israels in there, right? Israel as in the people of God traced through the line of Jacob versus Israel, the northern kingdom. We have to make that distinction between Israel, the people of the promise, which then transitions into Christ, and then from Christ, the church becomes Israel, versus today's nation of Israel. So those are 4 different things. And so what we see happening in Israel today, with all the fighting going on and everything, the absolute tragedy of what's happening, I think many people really confuse that last Israel, the nation today, with the first 2. That there is a historic nature to the ethnic groups, but there's a lot more than just ethnic Israel living in Israel today, in that nation. But also, there's this temptation to say, well, what God's talking about to Israel in Isaiah is now referring to the nation today. Rather, you're going to find what's happening in Israel today in the book of Revelation, where there's wars and famine and destruction and things like that. These are signs of the end time. This is what Jesus talks about, wars and rumors of wars. That's what's happening in Israel right now. There's no particular biblical emphasis on that other than kind of historic cultural disagreements. This is my understanding. And there's a religious element to these things, but not Christian, if I can say it that way. Because the Jewish people, let me clarify before I say this. Everyone is welcome into the Christian faith. But the Jewish faith is not the Christian faith. There was a connection for a while through the Old Testament, but in Christ, there's been a dramatic shift that the Christian faith is distinct from the Jewish faith. So as far as Israel, government, and anything, that any association they have with the Jewish faith is distinct from our Christian faith. And I think that's somewhere where a lot of Christians can become confused. And then the faith on the other side tends to be Islamic. Again, not a Christian faith. So as far as conversations within the church, what does the Bible say about these things? There's nothing particularly Christian about the conflict going on there. There is kind of religious division, but our stake in the fight as believers in Christ is that we see evil happening. We see people dying. We see people being hurt. We see tragedy. And our concern should be care and compassion. The same as any conflict that we see in the world. When we see people who are hurting, we know they will have needs. And we have a responsibility, a calling from God to try and help people in need. And so that's something I want to clarify for us, because as we read this, we could easily, and a lot of people do, read current things into this. But the current thing that is happening, coming out of our reading of Isaiah, is not a conflict in the Middle East. It is our slavery to sin and the redemption Christ has brought about. So there is history contained within this. Next week in particular, we're going to spend some time talking about the exile and what the exile was and the historical elements of that and the remnant that returned from that. but also the promises contained in Isaiah's works are really promises to God's people, to his remnant, who is us. Because we are the remnant connected to Christ, who is the offspring of Abraham. And so you really have to be tracing the promise. And the promise in Isaiah is really kind of narrowing the focus from all the people of Israel into the remnant, with an emphasis, as we will see as we eventually get to, that remnant is going to focus in even more into the person of Christ. Does this all make sense to you? I know I'm throwing a lot at you. There's a lot that stands behind this, and a lot of emotions get wrapped up in it. So I have been speaking expressly from a Christian perspective about the conflict in Israel. There's a lot more that stands behind it. There's politics, there's other things that stand behind it. I'm not going to address those today. And in part because I try, like St. Paul, to resolve to know nothing but Christ and him crucified. Because the complexity of what is going on, I don't want to, as your pastor, say something wrong, because that's likely what's going to happen if I start talking politics. I don't want to say something wrong and then have you think that this is somehow a biblical thing that I'm saying. So I'm trying to speak to you exclusively from the Christian, the church perspective, and leave people who are more studied on these topics to enlighten you as to kind of political things that we should care about, but just it's not my place to say them. The Jews are the chosen people, right? You hear that? So, yeah, does that not apply to Israel, that the Jews are the chosen people? So, to clarify what we mean by that, let's clarify that statement. What do we mean by the Jews are the chosen people? And this really goes back to Abraham, right? In Abraham, God made the promise. You can go to Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17. These are kind of some of those moments where God comes to Abraham and says, I am going to be your God. And in Genesis 17, that's when God comes and brings Abraham the sign of circumcision. And this is where you get a lot of this. I just talked about this with the sixth graders over the weekend. And what happens in that moment is God establishes a relationship between himself and Abraham and his descendants and his offspring. And so God makes a promise, I will be your God, you will be my people. And so this is what God chose Abraham. And so then when God chose Abraham, then it's about tracing the promise. Who receives that promise from God that he will be their God and they will be his people? And so it's to Abraham and to his offspring. But is that just all the kids of Abraham? Yes or no? How many kids did Abraham have? I hear a lot of mumbling. Anyone want to give it a guess? I hear a lot of twos. That's not right. He did have Ishmael, and then he had Isaac, and then after Sarah died, he actually remarried and had several other kids. But who got the promise? Isaac. Good. Isaac got the promise. And then Isaac, how many kids did Isaac have? 2. Jacob and Esau. Who got the promise? Israel, which is what God renamed Jacob to be. And so then the promise then gets traced to Israel. And to Israel, to Jacob's 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes, this is where the promise is lingering. But what we're seeing happening in the book of Isaiah is that promise is getting narrowed. That not all of the descendants of Abraham, not all the descendants of Isaac are going to be included in the promise because, well, they've rejected him. They've rejected God. They have refused to be his people. And so God is going to cut them off. But Jair Yashub, a remnant will return. God's not completely abandoning his people or his promise. There will be a remnant because he is going to keep his promise. And this is what has been carrying us through the first half of the book of Isaiah, is that what's happening is the people have abandoned God. They have not upheld their end of the covenant. And so God is going to bring destruction. You have broken your promise to me. I'm no longer beholden to my end of the promise. And so he brings destruction. But God is so faithful, he is so loving of his people that he is not going to completely abandon them. He is going to continue to trace that promise. Now, one of the moments that we saw the promise get narrowed from just kind of a general promise to Abraham to something more specific is in 2 Samuel 7, when God comes to David and gives him the promise that your son will sit on your throne forever. Now, we see that as the promise of Jesus. And that's the fulfillment of the promise. Immediately it was fulfilled in Solomon, but eventually it gets fulfilled in Jesus. So God's narrowing this down because we eventually get to Jesus. And the promise narrows to that finite point of just Jesus. And this is what Paul says in Galatians 3. He talks about how when God made the promise to Abraham, he made the promise to Abraham and to his offspring, meaning one, not offsprings, meaning many. And what Paul's saying is, this is about Jesus. The promise is about Jesus. And so everyone standing between Abraham and Jesus really is about being the people of the promise, being connected to the promise which was fulfilled in Jesus. And now everyone who comes after Jesus, well, they are a part of Jesus, therefore they receive the promise. And that's where we stand. I have no Jewish heritage that I know of. I'm guessing many of you don't either. You do? That's awesome. And I'm not surprised. A few people are going to have some of that. But that's not what's important anymore. What's important is, are you connected to Jesus? Do you have him? Because the new covenant, or if you use an older English translation of that word covenant, the New Testament, is that the promise is found in Jesus. And so this is how we say we are now Israel. This is what I mean when I talk about the church being Israel, is that Israel being the people of God, being the ones who are connected to the promise. This is the move that St. Paul makes in Romans 9 through 11, is that now we have been grafted into what it means to be Israel because we are connected to Christ. And so what's important is no longer the ethnic heritage. From what Paul says, it sounds like God still, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile, both in glory and in destruction. So the Jewish people still have that special place in God's heart. But that doesn't mean that they are just kind of off scot-free. They still need Jesus. And that's what Paul says. And so we get grafted in, we get made a part of that promise because of Jesus. And so this is historically speaking, in the Old Testament, it really was about tracing the promise through the history of Israel, through God's people that he chose. But it wasn't just ethnic. You can't just limit Israel to an ethnic group, because let's talk about Rahab. Let's talk about Ruth. Who are they? Gentiles. That's the New Testament word for it. Foreigners. They are people who are not of Israel. They are not from the line of Jacob. They have no association in their parentage to Israel, but they are brought into Israel. They are made a part of the tribes of Israel, specifically the tribe of Judah. Because whose great-great-great-great-grandmothers are they? Well, let's start with David. And from David, you get Jesus. They are both included in the genealogy of Jesus. So even when it's about Israel, it's not about Israel. It's about being connected to the promise. Now, Israel was the people God chose. That's why we talk about them as God's chosen people. They're the ones that God chose to bring about the offspring of Abraham. And so it's a family story. But It's all about the promise. And the promise ultimately is in Jesus. And when Jesus came, things shifted. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. So you really have to understand this. And if I remember correctly, part of the challenge is there's almost a fear in the church of being anti-Semitic. And that's why I'm even kind of being cautious about how I speak, because there's an easy misinterpretation of what I'm saying. And I think in particular following World War II and the Holocaust and the genocidal racial evil that was committed, I mean, the fallout of that was a reaction, and a lot of it positive, but some of it an overreaction. And so it leads people into error when talking about the Christian faith.
Well, when I think of those things, I think of people who fall and you're misled by the things of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they get caught up in the tangential aspects of back.
Yes. Yes, when you lose sight of the word, what ends up happening is it's so easy to believe the lies because you're not listening to the truth. And so that leads us into confusion and everything. And there are many people who are doing their best to faithfully follow Jesus, but in so doing have lost sight about what he's truly about. And so that leads to some of that conflict and confusion.
When I think of Israel and confusion, I focus more on Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where he ascended and that's where he'll return.
Yeah.
So that focal area
Yeah.
of where the history and
The city of Jerusalem being a focal point. And actually, I mean, we're reading Isaiah right now. What is another word that God uses to refer to the city of Jerusalem? Say it loud and proud. Zion. Mount Zion. Is that a theme that we've encountered in Isaiah? Yes. Yes. God puts a lot of emphasis on Zion because Zion is the place where he said he was going to work. And where did Jesus come to? Zion. And he did so much of his work there. And God put emphasis on that geographic location through the history of what has happened. That being said, there's nothing particularly holy about that ground, because when Jesus died on the cross, what happened? In the temple on Mount Zion. The curtain tore in two. The curtain that was keeping us out of God's presence because he was too glorious for us sinners, that we could not stand to be in his presence. It was a protective curtain. When Jesus died on the cross, when he paid for our sins, now we have access to God. So he tore that curtain because he says, I'm not going to stay here anymore. I'm coming to you. So what was the place of God's presence? Is God still found on Zion? Yes. Where else is he found? Everywhere. Even as far away as Utica, Michigan, God is here with us. And so there's a lot that has happened, and there's a lot of emphasis, and God uses the imagery of Jerusalem in Revelation 21 specifically. He brings back Jerusalem, but he does it with this image of Jerusalem being not just a city, but a people. And who's the people? The church. But not just the church, because the church is a New Testament thing. It's all the people from the Old Testament as well. It is all of the people of God. This is the imagery that God uses when he's bringing Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, into the world. This is the church. This is the people of God. And so God's still putting some of that emphasis on Jerusalem, but not as a city or a geographic thing, but as the people of God. Now, when Jesus returns and he picks somewhere on earth to come back to, my guess is he's going to go to Jerusalem. He's caught up so much of his history in the world in that location That makes sense to me. And that seems likely given everything he's done, but also he hasn't told me that. He's, God gets to do what he's going to do. And so I want to make sure that we have an appropriate understanding of Israel and of Jerusalem and what God has done. And that there's a lot of history, and God has done a lot there. But what we understand as the church is that those things aren't what's important anymore. What's important now is being connected to Christ. And Christ has given us that opportunity anywhere in the world. And that's why the disciples were sent from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, because with them goes God. With us is God.
When you think of each individual, he loves us all, but he gave us a purpose, and that's where you constantly, it's like your own journey to find out what his will is, that history, and then how does it relate to me? How do I cope with all things?
Yeah. That very personal journey of faith that God gives us and everything. We actually have a nice Latin word for this. Do you see up the words on our raritas up here? What are those? Sanctus, sanctus, sanctus. Anyone know what that means? Holy, holy, holy. So I'm pretty sure we're pulling this from Isaiah 6 when Isaiah is at the throne room of God and he's seeing God, and what are the angels crying? Holy, holy, holy. This is how we talked about God. And so sanctus gives us the word sanctification. That translate that into English, that's holyification, the making of us holy. This is the unique work of the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit comes into our lives and changes us, shapes us, sends us on a journey of faith, that as we go on this journey, that we would draw closer to God, that we would become holier throughout what we do. And so this is the journey of faith that we all get to go on. And it's a journey of God with us, the Holy Spirit living in us and shaping our lives. So, we are 20 minutes in and we haven't even started talking about Isaiah 30. Any other questions before we move on? All right, let's dive into our reading for today. And some things I want to make note of before we dive into the specific text. Because since we can't cover the whole section, I want to give you just an idea of what is happening in this section. And that's that first question. What is the overarching move made in this section of Isaiah from chapter 28 to 33? And what's going on is, up until now, God has been kind of issuing condemnations to the world around Judea. Or I should say Judah. Judea is more localized. So God's issuing condemnations to the world around Judah because Isaiah is a prophet sent to Judah, sent to Jerusalem, the southern kingdom. And so he's speaking to Ahaz, the king of the southern kingdom. We'll see him next week speaking with Hezekiah, who's a descendant of Ahaz. He is the prophet to the southern kingdom. And so he's been issuing these condemnations to the world around him. You see him talking about the northern kingdom, Ephraim, Israel. He's talking about how they will be destroyed, setting burdens on them. The 10 burdens being to all these places around the kingdom of Judah. And there's all sorts of things happening in this relation to the world around them. But now what happens in these, 6 chapters? What happens in these 6 chapters is God makes a move from looking out to looking in. So now God is addressing Judah specifically, and he's going to bring about his word of what's going to happen in Judah. And the structure God uses is a chiasm. You guys remember what a chiasm is? A chi being the Greek letter X. And so we're just kind of looking at the first half where, I'll do it the other way so it's right to left for you guys. We move into a center point and then out following the same path. And so the first thing and the last thing are paired. The second to first thing and the second to last thing are paired until you reach that center point, which doesn't have a pair. And the center point is the critical turning moment in what happens. And so it's that center point that receives most of our focus. And so the chiastic structure, the center point of that in this section is chapter 30, which is why we're addressing it today. I was reading through chapter 29. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and I was like, I gotta do the center point of the chiasm. We got to see this turning point in what God is doing in the lives of his people. And so now what we see is we're looking at the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, with its capital being Jerusalem, and the centerpiece of that capital being the temple on top of Mount Zion. So this is the imagery that we have to be aware of as we're going to dive into this passage for today. Thoughts, comments, or questions? Then why don't we begin reading Isaiah 30? And I'm going to begin by reading the first 7 verses. Ah, stubborn children, declares the Lord, who carry out a plan, but not mine, who make an alliance, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, who set out to go down to Egypt without asking for my direction, to take refuge in the protection of Pharaoh, and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the protection of Pharaoh turn to your shame, and the shelter in the shadow of Egypt to your humiliation. For though his officials are at Zion and his envoys reach Hanes, everyone comes to shame through a people that cannot profit them, and brings neither help nor profit, but shame and disgrace. An oracle on the beasts of the Negev, through a land of trouble and anguish, from where come the lioness and the lion, the adder and the flying fiery serpent. They carry their riches on the backs of donkeys and their treasures on the humps of camels, to a people that cannot profit them. Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore, I have called her Rahab, who sits still. What do you hear in that? What was that? Someone made a mistake. Yes. What was their mistake? What was that? They're putting their faith in the wrong place. This is exactly right. This is what God is condemning. He says, you're going to trust in Egypt. You want Egypt to rescue you? Egypt can't do anything. You're asking for help that is worthless. And in that last section, he's saying, you're going on this journey, right? Through a land of trouble and anguish, from where come the lioness and the lion, the adder and the flying fiery serpent. Going through the wilderness. They carry their riches on the backs of donkeys and their treasures on the humps of camels. So we're bringing a tribute on this dangerous journey. We're risking life and limb to bring our riches to a people that cannot profit them. I'm going to pay you for your help, but they can't offer the help they need because Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Egypt's not going to be able to do anything for you. But the people wanted to trust in anything rather than God. They're saying, we don't want to rely on God, so we're going to look for something else. It's the same problem Ahaz had, right? Ahaz wanted to say, I'm going to look for a solution that is not God. Because at that time, it was Damascus and Ephraim, those two kingdoms are coming to threaten him, to bully him into submission. And so he needs help because he can't defeat these two nations together. And so where does he turn for help? And God's there going, me, look to me. I made a promise to David. I'm going to keep my promise to David. I'm going to keep you on the throne. Trust in me, and I will make it happen. And what does Ahaz do? He goes to Assyria and says, hey, you want to help out? And God goes, no! I just told you I was going to take care of you. You want me to prove it? Ask me for a sign. And Ahaz goes, oh no, I couldn't ask you for a sign. And God goes, too bad. You're getting one. Look at what I can do. That before your child's even born, these nations are going to be taken care of. I have a plan for your good. Ahaz never trusted in him. And his faithlessness carried on to the rest of the people of Judah. They continued to be faithless. They didn't do enough to trust in God. We're going to get to see that next week. Hezekiah, he was good. He did a good job, and he still failed to trust in God. He still was making earthly alliances and not trusting in God. And so when this destruction that's going to come, when God's judgment is going to land on the kingdom of Judah, the people are going to be pulled into exile. They're going to be destroyed. And some of the people are going to say, where can we find hope? Let's go down to Egypt. Let's go and try and make a life there. And this happens. We know this happened. Jeremiah got dragged along with this crowd. He's like, God told me not to go. And they're like, too bad, you're coming with us. And they drag him down to Egypt because they think they're going to be safe there. What Jonah learned is you can't run away from God. And the people of Israel learned that as well. So don't trust in the things of the world. Don't put your trust in the wrong things. Who should you put your trust in? In God. Because God's going to take care of you. But God's not done issuing condemnations to his people. So we're going to read this next section, verses 8 through 17. And now go, write it before them on a tablet and inscribe it in a book, that it may be for the time to come a witness forever. For they are rebellious people, lying children, unwilling to hear the instructions of the Lord, who say to seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us smooth things. Prophesy illusions. Leave the way. Turn aside from the path. Let us hear no more about the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, thus says the Holy One of Israel, because you despise this word and trust in oppression and perverseness and rely on them, therefore, this iniquity shall be to you like a breach in a high wall, bulging out and about to collapse, whose breaking comes suddenly in an instant, and its breaking is like that of a potter's vessel, that is smashed so ruthlessly that among its fragments not a shard is found with which to take fire from the hearth, or to dip up water out of the cistern. For thus says the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved, in quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But you were unwilling, and you said, no, we will flee upon horses. Therefore you shall flee away, and we will ride upon swift steeds. Therefore your pursuers shall be swift. 1,000 shall flee at the threat of one. At the threat of 5 you shall flee, till you are left like a flagstaff on top of a mountain, like a signal on a hill. What's going on? What do you hear in those verses? Pardon? Sorry, sometimes I think I'm hard of hearing. The plan of getting help just fails, right? They're going to go get help from elsewhere, and God says, it ain't going to work. What's going to happen? I hear a lot of whispering. You got to be bold because I'm far away. Once more? What did you say? Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be turmoil because they're looking in the wrong place. It's going to fall apart. God's telling them, you have rejected me. I offered you peace. I offered you quietness. Listen to what he says here in these verses. For thus said the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and trust will be your strength. But you were unwilling. And you said, no, we will flee upon horses. Therefore, you shall flee away. And we will ride upon swift steeds. Therefore, your pursuers shall be swift. Your plans to escape this wrath by your own means aren't going to work. If you had listened to God in quietness and in rest, if you had turned to God and said, you are my help, you are my salvation, God's like, I was ready to go. You just didn't want that. And so, how does God choose to punish his faithless people? This happens so often in the Bible, where God's like, let me help you. I want to help you. And the people reject him. And God's answer to them is, if you want that, you can have it. And that's punishment enough. If you want to run away from your enemies, you can try running. I'm not chasing after you, but they will, and they're faster. If you want to be saved, come to me. But the people don't want to be saved. Because, as it says, let us hear no more about the Holy One of Israel. We don't want to hear what God has to say. Do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us smooth things. You have to think of smooth here as like comforting things. Speak to us what we want to hear. Prophesy illusions, not truth. We don't want to hear truth. Truth is no longer important to us. What's important to us is our comfort in who we are and what we want. This is what we want to hear. Leave the way. Turn aside from the path. Let us hear no more of the Holy One of Israel. It's a rejection of God. I don't want to hear God's truth. I want to hear what my itching ears want to hear. Isn't that what Jesus said? So that actually comes to us from Proverbs 3:5-6. But yeah, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. This is biblical truth. This is what God's trying to convince people of time and time again. You can't do it. Who can? Jesus. Don't look at yourself. Don't say, I can save myself. Don't look at the things of this world. They can't help you. Look at the cross. On the cross is real help. Because on the cross is where our God did his work to bring redemption.
But the Jews still reject him?
They did. And that's why he has cut them off. This is what the language that God uses in Romans, is that when they rejected Christ, God cut them off. And so Paul's using the image of a tree that has now Christ as the trunk, the Old Testament roots, Christ as the trunk, and then the branches are the people following Christ. And if they reject Christ, they are dead branches, and God cuts them off. But now there's a spot open on the tree, and so he grafts in, you know the process of grafting, taking a branch from another tree and putting it onto a new tree. He grafts in the Gentiles. This is us. We have been grafted into Christ. We have been attached to Christ. We don't belong. And if we reject Christ in any way, we're going to be cast out too. But when we are attached to Christ, we belong. And so this is what God does. He says, trust in me. Don't trust in the things of this world, because I am the only one who can bring true rescue, true restoration. That's his promise. And we look at this as punishment. God's punishing his people. He would say it that way too. But he punishes his people for rejecting him by letting them walk away. But what happens when you are separate from God? Nothing good. It's death. It's destruction. It's chaos. It's being pursued by people who are swifter than you. It's being left abandoned. But God does not want to leave us there. God desires our salvation. God desires our salvation so much that he chose to die instead of leaving us be. And so God's going to bring about a restoration. And this is the turn that God makes here in chapter 30. He turns from focusing on, you have abandoned me, and because you've done that, you're going to get what you asked for, but I have not abandoned you. I'm still going to be faithful to my promise that I made to David. I'm still going to be faithful to my promise that I made to Abraham, that I am going to bless the world through him and through his offspring. We're not there yet, but I'm going to be faithful. And he's going to fulfill his promises. Continuing on with verses 18 through 22. Therefore, the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. For a people shall dwell in Zion, in Jerusalem. You shall weep no more. He will surely be gracious to you at the sound of your cry. As soon as he hears it, he answers you. And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teacher will not hide himself anymore. But your eyes shall see your teacher, and your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left. Then you will defile your carved idols overlaid with silver and your gold-plated metal images. You will scatter them as unclean things. You will say to them, begone. You might abandon God. You might walk away from him, but God is faithful. He is going to be there with you. He has his plan to restore Zion, to restore Jerusalem, to bring to fruition his kingdom and his glory, and he's going to do it with you. And so when you find yourself struggling to follow him, he's not leaving you. You will always see your teacher with you. You'll hear his voice. And when you're tempted to stray from the path, when you want to go either to the right or to the left, he's going to say, no, this is the way. This is the way. Follow it. Follow him and his promises, and he's going to guide you, and he is going to bless you and keep you. And when we're listening to his voice, when we're following that path, what's going to happen? We're going to reject our idols. We're going to look at these things and say, be gone. I have no need for the idols of this world because I have true help. Thoughts, comments, or questions? Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to repeat the question in case anyone didn't hear it. Is he speaking to the remnant in this scenario? Because you said not everyone in Jerusalem and Judea could be bad. That God is he speaking specifically now to the people who are faithful, whom he will redeem? First of all, I want to address not everyone could be bad. Yeah, they are, right? No one in this situation is deserving of God's grace. And that's the point that God is making, is that even though you are faithless, I am faithful, and I will rescue you. And it's a good news to me, because I've been plenty faithless, but he continues to be faithful. And so the context into which he's speaking is he's speaking to a people who are faithless as a whole. And God's not singling out individuals. We'll see a little bit of that next week because we get to single out Hezekiah. But in this, God's not saying, oh, you're pretty good, you're not. You're all bad. You all deserve this destruction. And it's a destruction to come. This speaking comes before the Babylonians come and invade and leads to the exile and everything like this. But he's saying, you all deserve what's coming. But God's faithful. And so God will redeem some of you. He will keep a remnant for himself. And so what is God going to do? He's going to put them through the crucible, right? He's going to have them go through 70 years of exile. They're going to go through so much hardship and turmoil and oppression. But on the other side of that, they're casting out their idols. They're doing what they can to follow God. Yeah, the people following the high holidays of that God had given his people, but with their actions, not with their hearts. And this is a theme. Are you doing this because you're trusting in God, or are you doing this because, hey, it's a good time to get together with family and friends? Why are you celebrating Christmas? To celebrate the incarnation, the birth of Christ, right? Is that why everyone celebrates Christmas? We have a pretty clear example of what that looks like. And so that's why you should be in church on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Because the holiday is worthless without Christ. These feasts and festivals that everyone's doing, they honor God with their lips, but their hearts are not in it. I think that's Isaiah. I know it's one of the prophets talking about the very same situation, that the people, they can say all they want, but they are not living out their faith. They are not trusting in God. And you can see it by their actions. They're not good enough to deserve God's mercy and his grace. All bad, when I say they're all bad, is that very generic covering sin, or is it specifically pertaining to their situation? That's your question, right? Can I answer that question next week? Because we have a case study next week. Next week, we're going to talk about Hezekiah. And when we're talking about the kings of Judah, when we talk about the kings of Israel, north and south, David was a good king, or Saul was a bad king. We'll start with Saul. Saul was a bad king. David was a good king. He was the best example of what it means to be king. Solomon was pretty good. He had his problems. Rehoboam is when the kingdom divided. In the northern kingdom, there was never a king who was declared good. In the southern kingdom, I think it was like 7 kings where God said, yeah, you're all right, with 2 of those being like, you did a good job. Those 2 kings being Josiah and Hezekiah. So those 2 kings were the closest that the kingdoms of Israel ever got to David. But what we're going to see next week in chapters 38 and 39 is Hezekiah didn't live up to God's calling in his life. And it wasn't just he was a sinner, and we're going to stop there. There's very specific sins we'll talk about. So to answer briefly, I mean, we can't talk about everyone, but we have a case study in Hezekiah, and what we'll see is that he failed in this particular area. He failed to trust in God. Even the best shot they had, unless David came back, the best shot that the people of Israel had had in centuries wasn't good enough. But then let's talk about David. David wasn't good enough, was he? Did David live up to what God expected of him? No. You guys know the story. We like to use the word adultery. I think we want to soften it. His rape of Bathsheba, his murder of Uriah, his failure to be king when his one son rapes his half-sister, and then her brother murders his half-brother in revenge, and then his failure to punish any of these crimes, leading to rebellion, leading to war within his nation. David went through a civil war with a coup led by his own son. David wasn't enough. The king, the man after God's own heart, wasn't enough. Who was? You know the answer. It's Jesus. Jesus was enough to overcome the problems of the world. And his promise is to establish a kingdom, a new Jerusalem, which will be his kingdom, which will be freed from the power of sin and death and the devil. This is what he offers to you. This is our hope, is a resurrection life in the promises of the true King. And this is what everything in the Bible is pushing us toward. It's pushing us toward Jesus and the hope that he offers. Thoughts, comments, questions? All right, we have a few more minutes. Let's finish off chapter 30. We're starting at verse 23. And he, God, will give rain for the seed with which you sow the ground, and bread, the produce of the ground, which will be rich and plenteous. And that day your livestock will be large, will graze in large pastures, and the oxen and donkeys that work the ground will eat seasoned fodder, which will be winnowed with shovel and fork. And on every lofty mountain and every high hill there will be brooks running with water in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers fall. Moreover, the light of the moon will be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun will be sevenfold as the light of 7 days, in the day when the Lord binds up the brokenness of his people and heals the wounds inflicted by his blow. Behold, the name of the Lord comes from afar, burning with his anger in thick rising smoke. His lips are full of fury, and his tongue is like a devouring fire. His breath is like an overflowing stream that reaches up to the neck to sift the nations with a sieve of destruction, and to place on the jaws of the peoples a bridle that leads away. You shall have a song in the night when a holy feast is kept, and gladness of heart, as when one sets out to the sound of the flute, to go to the mountain of the Lord, to the rock of Israel. And the Lord will cause his majestic voice to be heard, and the descending blow of his arm to be seen, in furious anger, and a flame of devouring fire, with a cloudburst and storm and hailstones. The Assyrians will be terror-stricken at the voice of the Lord when he strikes with his rod, and every stroke of the appointed staff that the Lord lays on them will be to the sound of tambourines and lyres. Battling with brandished arm, he will fight with them, for a burning place has long been prepared. Indeed, for the king it is made ready, its pyre made deep and wide, with fire and wood in abundance. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of sulfur, kindles it. God is going to rescue his people. God is going to bring about the destruction of Assyria. God is going to bring about the destruction of those who are oppressors, those who are evildoers. And in so doing, those who are faithful to him will receive his protection, his safety, his security. They will be blessed. They will be freed from the burden of the evil. This is God's promise, that he is going to take care of his people, and he is going to bless us. Thoughts, comments, questions? This is what Isaiah is driving us toward. This is what Isaiah is talking about. He's talking about how God is the Redeemer. He is the rescuer. When you reject God, you reject those promises. You reject his work in your life. And so Isaiah is calling to repentance. Turn away from your evil. Turn away from these things that push God away, and instead come to him in humility, because when you do, you receive his gifts. And the latter half of the book of Isaiah is going to talk about, and boy, what gifts they are. But first, you need to recognize your sin. I think this gets missed in our world a lot, is people don't recognize their sinfulness. They don't recognize that they need to be rescued from themselves. And so they just want to look at the promises and the nice things God says. And God says, you've got some serious problems. And this is why we start our worship services with confession absolution. It's a common practice here. We'll confess our sins. Why do we start that way? Because we need to recognize that we are these people. We are the broken people who do not deserve God's good. But we come anyway because the next breath you get the absolution. You get God saying, but I have so much good planned for you.
I think of Christ and his omnipotence. He is not knowing. He still prays in the morning to get grounded. How many of us have to do that?
Yeah. Jesus being omnipotent and all-knowing, and he still prayed. Why is this? Because faith, righteousness, they're about being in a relationship with God. Jesus was keeping up the relationship with his Father. He calls us to the same. Be in a relationship with God.
Maybe that's what David did. He was getting busy with all the busyness instead of staying focused and grounded like he did with Goliath.
Yeah, is this what David did? Did he get caught up in the things of life? Did he not do what he was supposed to? Instead of trusting like he did with Goliath, as you said. And yeah, there's an interesting comment as the narrative in 2 Samuel 9, I'm pretty sure that's where David and Bathsheba is it starts with, it was springtime when the kings go to war. Like, this is a fact of life. You go to war in the springtime. This is what kings do. This is what the king should be doing. And what was David doing? Hanging out at his palace, not leading his troops, not fulfilling his calling. Because this is what David and Goliath is about. The narrative is about how God has rejected Saul as king because Saul is failing in his role as king. So then God sends Samuel to anoint David to be king. He does this. And what immediately happens? Now Israel is confronted by an enemy. And what is the job of the king? To stand at the head of the army and defeat that enemy. And what does Saul do? Anyone else want to do it? I'll pay you. I'll pay you really well if you could just do this for me, because I don't want to do the job of a king. And what does David do? He does the job of the king because he trusts in God. And so David stood at the head of the army. He defeated an unbeatable foe because he didn't do it, because he trusted in God. And now what is David doing? He's at home, not leading the army, getting himself into trouble. It was a failure in his responsibilities as king that led David into his sin. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? All right, I promise in a couple of weeks it's going to get a lot better. We're going to get to hear more and focus more on the promises of God and how he blesses his people. That's going to be in 2 weeks. We got to talk about Hezekiah next week. And then in 2 weeks, Pastor Chad will be here. I'm out of town. So on October 16th, Pastor Chad will be leading you guys through Isaiah 40 and the great promises that begin in that chapter. Promises that are pointing straight at Jesus. And then we're going to continue through the rest of the book where God is promising to work on behalf of his people. So just a little taste of what's to come. Thank you, everyone.